Coach Shonn Brown was sitting in his office at Charlotte Christian School in North Carolina, holding a handwritten list that could have forever changed the history of basketball. His hands trembled slightly as he pointed to a name that he had almost crossed out nearly 20 years ago. Steph Curry. Tears gleamed in his eyes when he murmured the words that had haunted him ever since. I almost committed the biggest mistake of my career. I almost destroyed a child's dream because of my own prejudice. You can perceive that some moments in life carry the weight of 1,000 what-ifs. To understand how we arrived at this moment of devastating confession, we need to go back in time, when a seemingly simple decision almost deprived the world of witnessing one of the greatest transformations in modern basketball. It was a typical spring day in 2024, and Shonn was organizing decades of accumulated memories in his office at Charlotte Christian School. The aroma of aged paper mixed with the familiar smell of floor wax that permeated every corridor of the school, creating a nostalgic atmosphere that touched deeply his weary soul. The walls around him told the story of a career dedicated to developing young athletes, trophies that gleamed under fluorescent light, yellowed photos of victorious teams, framed certificates that represented decades of tireless dedication. Each object carried memories of boys who became men, of dreams that were cultivated or, in some painful cases, inadvertently destroyed. How many times in life can a moment of reflection confront us with truths we preferred to keep buried? Shonn had always prided himself on being a coach who recognized talent when he saw it. For years, he had built his reputation on the ability to transform mediocre players into exceptional athletes, to find diamonds in the rough where others saw only common stones. But on that day of silent organization, an unexpected discovery was about to shake the foundations of everything he believed about himself. It's impossible not to feel the weight of irony when we discover that our greatest successes may have been born from our worst instincts. While separating old documents into organized piles, Shonn found a forgotten folder in the bottom of a stuck drawer. The paper was yellowed by time, and the smell of mold told stories of neglected years. Inside the folder, like a relic from an era that seemed simultaneously distant and vivid, was the original selection list for the varsity team from 2005. His eyes scanned the familiar names, each bringing back young and hopeful faces that had passed through his practices decades before. But it was when he reached the end of the list that his heart stopped like an engine that chokes on a steep climb. There was the name Steph Curry, written in his own handwriting, but accompanied by a notation that made him swallow hard. Too small? Parents will complain? Check before cutting. Next to the name, there was a trembling question mark, and, even more devastating, an incomplete circle that almost became a definitive X. Have you ever wondered how many extraordinary lives might be hanging by a thread of our seemingly insignificant decisions? In that moment, sitting in silence, broken only by the distant hum of air conditioning, Shonn confronted a truth he had buried so deeply in his memory that he had almost managed to convince himself it had never happened. He had been one pen stroke away from cutting from the varsity team, the one who would become one of the greatest players in NBA history. The memory returned like an emotional tsunami that brings down all barriers carefully constructed by time. September of 2005. Steph was just a scrawny 16-year-old boy, all awkward arms and legs, with a shy smile, and eyes that shone with a determination that Shonn, in his experienced arrogance, had interpreted as juvenile naivety. The sound of his own accelerated breathing echoed through the empty office like a ghostly reminder Of all the moments when he had doubted the potential of young athletes simply because they didn't fit the traditional mold he carried in his mind. It's impossible not to recognize that life's greatest tragedies are often not the mistakes we make, but those we almost make without even realizing it. Shonn vaguely remembered the pressures of that year. Athletic director demanding immediate results, influential parents doing political lobbying so their bigger and more imposing children would secure spots on the team, and he himself struggling against insecurities about selection methods he had used throughout his entire career. Steph, with his 5 feet 9 inches of height and physique that more resembled a math student than an athlete, didn't seem to be the answer to any of these pressures. On the contrary, he seemed to be exactly the type of choice that could generate criticism and questioning about Shonn's competence as a coach. How is it possible that fear of others' judgment can blind us to the greatness that is right before our eyes? His hands trembled as he carefully folded the paper, as if he were handling evidence of a crime he had almost committed. The weight of guilt descended upon his shoulders like a lead blanket, and for the first time in decades, Shonn questioned how many other decisions he had made based on prejudices disguised as experience. In that silence, charged with painful revelations, he knew he needed to speak with someone about that secret he had carried alone for almost 20 years. He picked up the phone with fingers that still trembled from the discovery and dialed a number he knew by heart, even after so many years. "Mike," he said when the familiar voice answered on the other side. "Do you remember that boy Curry we almost cut in 2005? The pause that followed was long enough for Shonn to hear his own heart beating, like a distant drum. When Mike finally responded, his voice carried the same weight of shared guilt. "Shonn, do you really want to talk about this after all these years?" And in that moment, Shonn understood that he wasn't the only one who had carried the weight of that error almost committed. The truth had haunted both of them in silence, like a ghost that refuses to find peace until justice is done. Some secrets are too heavy to be carried alone, and some uncommitted errors are too big to be forgotten. September of 2005. Charlotte Christian School was bubbling with the electric energy of the beginning of a new basketball season, and the smell of newly applied wax on the floors mixed with the sweet aroma of expectation that hung through the corridors like invisible perfume. Shonn Brown walked through the facilities he knew like the palm of his hand, but carried on his shoulders a weight that grew with each passing day. You can perceive that some decisions carry the power to define not only our destiny, but the destiny of everyone we touch. In that crucial September, Shonn faced the most intense pressure of his career, selecting only 12 players for the varsity team among 23 talented candidates who dreamed of a spot. The Charlotte Christian Gymnasium echoed with the rhythmic sound of balls bouncing against the waxed floor, creating a familiar symphony that normally calmed Shonn's soul. But during those weeks of tryouts, every sound seemed amplified, every movement of the boys analyzed under the relentless magnifying glass of expectations that went far beyond the sport. The bleachers, normally empty during practices, frequently housed shadowy figures observing every play with hawk eyes, influential parents who whispered among themselves about their children's chances, school directors concerned with the program's prestige, and university scouts who were already taking notes about who should or shouldn't be on the court. How is it possible that the simple act of choosing a basketball team can transform into a political minefield where every decision explodes into 1,000 unexpected consequences? Steph Curry, at 16 years old, stood out in the middle of that chaos not for his physical imposingness, which was practically non-existent, but for something indefinable that emanated from him like heat radiating from a bonfire. His movements had a natural fluidity that contrasted dramatically with his scrawny physique, and when the ball left his hands toward the basket, it seemed to follow a trajectory dictated more by magic than by physics. But the numbers didn't lie, and numbers were what mattered in the reports that Shonn needed to present to the athletic director. Steph measured 5 feet 9 inches in his socks, weighed little more than some of the training equipment, and it seemed that a strong gust of wind could carry him off the court like an autumn leaf. It's impossible not to feel the cruel irony of a system that measures potential in centimeters and kilograms, completely ignoring the size of the heart that beats inside the chest. During those tense weeks of evaluation, Shonn watched Steph train with a dedication that bordered on obsession. The boy arrived earlier than any other player and left last, as if he instinctively understood that he needed to work twice as hard as the others to have half the opportunities. On nights when everyone had already gone home, Steph remained alone on the court, executing the same sequence of shots repeatedly. The sound of the ball cutting through the net, echoing through the empty gymnasium like prayers whispered in an abandoned cathedral. Sweat ran down his thin forehead while he pursued a perfection that only he seemed capable of visualizing. How many times do we witness greatness being forged in silence, away from the applause and recognition that feed less determined egos? Meanwhile, the pressure on Shonn intensified like a screw being gradually tightened to the breaking point. The athletic director, a corpulent man with a voice that echoed authority through every corridor of the school, made casual visits to practices with increasingly frequent regularity. "Shonn," the director said during one of these visits, his voice laden with the weight of institutional expectations, "we need players who look like players. You understand what I'm saying? When other schools visit us, when parents come to watch games, they need to see athletes who inspire confidence." Have you ever wondered how seemingly innocent words can carry enough poison to kill dreams before they even have a chance to flourish? Shonn knew exactly what the director was insinuating without saying directly. Height impresses. Muscles draw attention. Steph Curry, with his appearance of a scholar who got lost on the way to the library, didn't fit the image the school wanted to project. But the boy has skill, Shonn tried to argue, feeling like a lawyer, defending a case he already knew was lost. "You should see how he shoots, how he sees the court." "Skill doesn't win championships alone," the director interrupted with the coldness of someone who had already made his decision. "We need physique, presence, players who intimidate opponents just by stepping on the court." It's impossible not to notice how entire systems can conspire against unique individuals, forcing them to fit into molds that were never made to contain them. Simultaneously, Shonn faced pressures coming from all directions like a general surrounded by invisible enemies. Parents of taller players made intense political lobbying, appearing in his office with suggestions about team composition that sounded more like veiled orders. Phones rang at strange hours with voices that whispered about school traditions and community expectations. During the sleepless nights that followed these encounters, Shonn walked through his house like a tormented ghost, questioning decades of coaching philosophy he had built based on the belief that pure talent would always find its way. But pure talent, he discovered bitterly, often needed to be packaged in the right body to be recognized. The final deadline approached like a storm on the horizon. 24 hours to deliver the definitive list. 23 hopeful boys would be reduced to 12 realized dreams and 11 broken hearts. And Steph Curry, the boy who trained as if his life depended on it, was swinging on the tightrope between the two destinies. How can a seemingly administrative decision carry the weight of altering the course of world sports history. On the eve of that fateful day, Shonn discovered something that shook him to his bones. The school janitor casually mentioned that he had been finding Steph in the gymnasium every morning at 5 o'clock, alone, executing a routine of 500 shots he had created for himself. 30 consecutive days, without missing a single day, even when he was sick. The revelation fell upon Shonn like lightning on a clear day. While he agonized over physiques and politics, Steph was silently demonstrating the type of dedication that separated champions from common players. That night, Shonn arrived home carrying the weight of a decision that could define two careers, his own and that of a scrawny boy who dreamed of things that seemed impossible. His wife immediately perceived the tension that radiated from him like fever heat. "How was practice?" she asked with the gentleness of someone who has known a man's moods for decades. Shonn stopped in the middle of the room, feeling the weight of 23 destinies in his trembling hands. "Tomorrow I might cut a boy who could be special, or maybe keep a boy who will never be big enough to be special. How can a man know the difference between real potential and desperate illusion?" The question hung in the air like a loaded cloud, ready to pour out all the storm of doubts that had accumulated during weeks of relentless pressure. It's impossible not to recognize that life's most difficult decisions are those where there are no right answers, only choices that will define who we are versus who we thought we were. That night, Shonn Brown didn't know he was about to face a conversation that would change not only Steph Curry's destiny, but his own understanding of what it really means to recognize greatness when it's right before our eyes. 6 o'clock in the morning. Charlotte Christian School was wrapped in the sacred silence that only places of learning know before life awakens. Shonn Brown pushed through the main doors of the school 2 hours before normal time, carrying on his back the weight of a decision that had robbed his sleep like a merciless thief in the early morning. The familiar smell of disinfectant mixed with the residual aroma of books and youthful dreams filled the empty corridors, but there was something different in the air. An electric energy that made each step echo like an accelerated heartbeat. You can perceive that some dawns carry the power to redefine entire destinies, and that one promised to be one of them. Shonn walked toward his office when he heard something that made him stop like a statue of salt. The rhythmic and hypnotic sound of a basketball bouncing against the gymnasium floor. It wasn't just the casual bouncing of someone playing around. It was the precise and obsessive cadence of someone who had transformed training into a sacred ritual. How is it possible that such a simple sound can carry so much transformative power? Following the sound, like a navigator following the North Star, Shonn walked silently to the double doors of the gymnasium. Through the glass, he saw Steph Curry alone on the court, executing the same sequence of shots he had perfected during months of solitary dawns. Sweat already ran down his thin forehead despite the cool morning temperature, and every movement emanated a determination that cut through the air like a sharp blade. Steph wasn't just training. He was waging a silent battle against all the no's he had heard during his life, against every look of doubt he had received, against a world that measured value in centimeters and kilograms. And in that moment, watching through the glass fogged by breath vapor, Shonn felt something move deeply in his chest. It was then that a memory buried for decades emerged like lightning in a dark night. Shonn, at 17 years old, scrawny like Steph, being cut from the university team by a coach who said the words that still echoed in his ears. "Boy, you're good, but you're not big enough. Maybe you should think about another sport." Have you ever wondered how old pains can suddenly awaken, bringing with them all the poison we thought we had overcome? In that devastating instant of recognition, Shonn understood with crystal clarity what was really happening. He wasn't evaluating Steph Curry based on technical or strategic criteria. He was reliving his own trauma of rejection, projecting his unhealed wounds onto a boy who dared to dream of greatness despite all the physical limitations the world pointed out. Steph stopped training when he noticed Shonn's presence through the glass. For an eternal moment, the two stared at each other through the transparent barrier. Mature man confronting his shadows from the past, young athlete facing his uncertainty about the future. It's impossible not to feel the cruel magic of moments when destinies cross, at crossroads we don't know we're traversing. Shonn pushed through the doors and entered the gymnasium, each step echoing through the empty space like drum beats announcing a decisive moment. The smell of honest sweat mixed with the sweet aroma of floor wax created an atmosphere that was simultaneously familiar and charged with tension. "Good morning, Coach," Steph said, his voice laden with that unique mixture of respect and nervousness that only teenagers can express when they feel something important is happening. Shonn stopped a few meters from Steph, feeling the weight of the cut list in his jacket pocket like a heated stone against his chest. "Steph, we need to talk." The words came out with more gravity than Shonn intended, and he saw the boy swallow hard, preparing to hear what both knew could be the end of a dream cultivated during years of silent sacrifice. "I know I could be cut," Steph said, his voice trembling slightly, but maintaining a dignity that cut Shonn's heart like a heated knife. "But I want you to know that I gave everything I had, Coach. Every practice, every shot, I gave everything." How is it possible that the raw honesty of a child can expose all the lies we tell ourselves? Shonn felt his own emotional barriers collapsing like a dam that can no longer contain the pressure accumulated over years. "Steph," he said, his voice laden with decades of repressed pain, "can I ask you a question? Why do you train alone every morning?" Steph looked directly into Shonn's eyes with that transparency that only young people possess before life teaches them to hide their truths. "Because I know I'm judged differently from the others, Coach. I know I need to be twice as good to have half the opportunities. So I wake up at 5 every day and come here to prove to myself that I deserve to be here." It's impossible not to recognize when we witness pure courage being distilled into simple words that carry the weight of mountains. In that moment, as if an emotional floodgate opened after decades of being sealed, Shonn found himself doing something he had never done with any player, being completely honest about his own vulnerabilities. "Steph," he said, feeling tears he hadn't shed in years beginning to form in his eyes, "when I was your age, I was cut from the college team. The coach said I was good, but not big enough. And you know what I did? I gave up. I never tried again." Steph remained silent, absorbing that confession like a sponge absorbs water, instinctively understanding that he was witnessing a moment of rare and precious vulnerability. "This morning," Shonn continued, his voice breaking slightly, "I was ready to cut you. Not for lack of skill, not for lack of dedication, but because you remind me of myself when I was your age. And I'm afraid that if you fail, it means I failed too." You can perceive that some confessions are so powerful they completely redefine our understanding of ourselves and others. Steph took a step toward Shonn, that premature wisdom some young people possess shining in his eyes like a lighthouse in a storm. "Coach," he said softly, "what if I don't fail? What if I manage to prove that small can be giant? What if this is my chance to show you that you didn't fail either? In that instant, something fundamental changed in Shonn Brown's universe. He realized that for years he had been cutting boys like Steph not to protect the basketball program, but to protect himself from the pain of reliving his own rejection. He was perpetuating a cycle of denial that had begun with his own unhealed wound. For 30 years, Shonn murmured, more to himself than to Steph, I cut boys like you because someone cut a boy like me. I was passing on the same pain that destroyed me, without even realizing it. How is it possible that healing old wounds can begin at the exact moment we stop inflicting on others the same scars we carry? Steph placed his hand on Shonn's shoulder in a gesture of understanding that transcended all barriers of age and hierarchy. Coach, everyone deserves a second chance to prove they're bigger than people think. In that moment, Shonn took the cut list from his pocket and, without hesitation, completely crossed out another player's name, guaranteeing Steph's spot on the varsity team. But more than that, he was crossing out decades of prejudices he had carried like unnecessary burdens. Steph, he said, his voice now firm with a conviction born from recognizing truth, welcome to Charlotte Christian's varsity team. But I want you to know, I'm not doing you a favor. I'm correcting a mistake I almost made, and a mistake that was made to me long ago. It's impossible not to feel the transformative magic of moments when we choose to break cycles of pain instead of perpetuating them. On that golden morning in Charlotte, two men separated by generations found healing in a conversation that began about basketball and ended about the courage to believe that greatness can come packaged in any size as long as the heart is big enough to dream without limits. We return to the present, 2024. Shonn Brown closed the folder containing the documents from 2005, but this time his hands no longer trembled. The weight he had carried for almost 2 decades had transformed into something different. No longer guilt for an error almost committed, but deep gratitude for a lesson that had changed not only his career, but his soul. You can perceive that some stories don't end with the decision made, but truly begin from it. The choice to keep Steph Curry on Charlotte Christian's varsity team was only the first chapter of a transformation that would reverberate through hundreds of lives in the years that followed. Shonn's office remained full of trophies and photos, but now each image told a different story. On the walls, among the traditional memories of championships and celebrations, there was a new collection, photos of players other coaches had considered too small, too slow, too different. Athletes who found in Shonn a defender when the whole world doubted their potential. The transformation had begun subtly that autumn of 2005. Steph didn't just justify his spot on the team. He completely revolutionized the way basketball was played at Charlotte Christian. His three-point shooting ability transformed. Defensive strategies of rival schools and his silent leadership inspired teammates to believe that greatness could be measured in courage, not centimeters. How is it possible that a single correct decision can create waves that spread for decades, touching lives we never imagined would be affected? During the years that followed, Shonn found himself radically changing his selection criteria. Where he once looked for height and muscle mass, he began to observe determination in eyes and hunger, for improvement in practices. He started recruiting the boy who arrived first and left last, regardless of whether his physical measurements seemed impressive or not. Charlotte Christian gradually transformed into a beacon for unlikely talents. Athletes who had been dismissed by other programs found there not just a second chance, but a coach who deeply understood what it meant to be underestimated. The smell of determination permeated every practice, and the sound of dreams being realized echoed through the school corridors like celestial music. It's impossible not to be moved when we witness how healing our own wounds can become medicine for others' pain. Dozens of young athletes who would have been cut by traditional criteria found in Shonn a mentor who saw potential where others saw limitations. Many earned college scholarships. Some reached minor professional leagues, but all took with them a lesson more valuable than any trophy. The certainty that their value wasn't determined by others' opinions about their physical limitations. The phone in his office rang, interrupting his nostalgic reflections. The voice on the other side carried an excitement that immediately infected Shonn. "Coach Brown, this is from the Warriors organization. Steph Curry would like to know if you would be available for a special meeting when we're playing in Charlotte next week." Have you ever wondered how certain people remain connected to us even after their paths follow completely different directions? On that game night, the Spectrum Center in Charlotte bubbled with the electric energy that only great sporting events can generate. The familiar aroma of popcorn mixed with the smell of expectation filled the air, while 20,000 people anxiously awaited to see North Carolina's prodigal son in action. Shonn was sitting in a VIP area when he felt a familiar hand touch his shoulder. He turned and found Steph Curry, now 36 years old, but carrying in his eyes the same determination that had shone on that decisive morning of 2005. "Coach Brown," Steph said, his voice laden with an emotion that transcended words. "There's something I need to tell you that I've needed to say for almost 20 years." They walked to a more reserved area, away from cameras and crowds, where important conversations could happen without interference. The distant sound of the crowd created a perfect soundtrack for a moment both knew was special. "Coach," Steph continued, "years later I discovered how close I came to being cut. I discovered about the pressures you faced, about your own story. And I want you to know, what you did for me that day didn't just change my life. It changed my understanding of what it means to give opportunities to people the world underestimates. It's impossible not to recognize that the greatest gifts we give often return to us multiplied in ways we could never imagine." Steph pulled an elegant envelope from his pocket and handed it to Shonn with the solemnity of someone offering something sacred. "This is for Charlotte Christian, a donation to create a permanent scholarship program for athletes others consider too different to succeed." Shonn opened the envelope with hands that trembled again, but this time with pure gratitude. The donation amount was substantial enough to guarantee that dozens of future Steph Currys would have their chances, regardless of physical measurements or others' prejudices. "But there's one condition," Steph added with a smile that carried decades of genuine affection. "I want it to be called the Coach Shonn Brown Program for Big-Hearted Athletes, because that's what I learned from you. Heart size always beats body size." How many times in life can a moment of recognition validate entire decades of difficult choices and painful transformations? In that instant, all the pieces of Shonn's journey fit together like a puzzle finally solved. The scrawny boy he had almost cut had become not only one of the greatest players in history, but a man who deeply understood the value of offering opportunities to the underestimated. "Steph," Shonn said, his voice choked by emotions that had accumulated for almost 2 decades, "you taught me that my function was never to find the best players. It was to help each player find their own version of greatness. You can perceive that some lessons are so powerful they completely redefine our understanding of purpose and meaning." They remained in silence for a moment, two men united by a morning in 2005 that had saved not only a promising career, but transformed two lives in ways that transcended any basketball court. When it came time for Steph to return to the locker rooms, he hugged Shonn with the strength of someone expressing gratitude accumulated over decades. "Coach, thank you for teaching me that greatness has no specific size, and thank you for having the courage to break your own prejudices to give me a chance." Shonn watched Steph walk back to his life as a global superstar, but carried in his heart the certainty that that scrawny boy had become exactly what he had always promised to be: giant where it mattered most. It's impossible not to feel the circular perfection of stories, where helping others ends up being the most profound way to heal our own wounds. Back in the office that night, Shonn carefully placed the donation envelope next to the newest photo on his wall, an image of him and Steph in the moment of embrace, two generations united by the understanding that true greatness flourishes when we choose to see potential where others see only limitations. As he turned off the lights and prepared to leave Charlotte Christian for the last time that special day, Shonn murmured a silent prayer of gratitude to the universe that had conspired to transform his greatest fear into his greatest lesson. Sometimes, he reflected, while walking through the empty corridors that echoed with memories of thousands of cultivated dreams, the biggest mistakes we don't make teach us more than all the successes we achieve. How is it possible that an entire career can be redefined by the moment we choose to believe in the impossible instead of surrendering to the inevitable? That night, Shonn Brown slept with the peace of someone who had learned that true legacies aren't built through the talents we discover, but through the opportunities we offer so others can discover their own unique version of greatness. And somewhere in North Carolina, hundreds of young athletes continued arriving early to practices and leaving last, carrying in their chests the certainty that someone would believe in them even when they themselves doubted their potential. Because a coach had learned long ago that big hearts always beat small bodies, and that sometimes the greatest victory is in almost committing a mistake that would change everything for the worse, but choosing, at the last moment, to believe in the best.